Everyone, this is chapter 4. We are talking about tissues, organs, systems, and homeostasis. We've moved on from cells. Remember, a bunch of cells working together make up a certain tissue. Tissues make up the organs. Organs make up the systems. Systems make up the organisms. So types of tissues. There are several types of tissues. There's 4 main ones, and then there's subcategories underneath them. We'll talk about all of them. So tissue is a collection of cells of the same type that perform a common function. There's 4 major tissue types. There's connective tissue, which binds and supports body parts. Muscular tissue moves the body and its parts. Nervous tissue conducts nerve impulses. And epithelial tissue covers all of our body surfaces and lines all of our body cavities. Connective tissue, or CT for short sometimes, because it can get kind of long, is the first section, or the next section. So it has 3 main components. There's specialized cells, there's ground substance, and there are protein fibers. The ground substance is the non-cellular material between the cells, and it varies in consistency from solid, as in bone, or fluid, as in blood. There's 3 types of protein fibers found in connective tissue. Collagen fibers are flexible and strong. Reticular fibers are thin and highly branched, like collagen. And elastic fibers contain elastin, which is a specific protein that stretches and recoils. A lot of things in our body need that stretching and then recoiling. There are 3 main types of connective tissue. There's fibrous, there's supportive, and there are fluid. Fibrous comes in 2 main forms, loose and dense. Both contain fibroblasts, which are separated by the matrix, that ground substance, as well as fibers. Loose fibrous connective tissue, sometimes called irregular connective tissue, includes areolar connective tissue, reticular connective tissue, and adipose tissue. And then there is dense fibrous connective tissue, sometimes called regular connective tissue. These are found in tendons and ligaments. Tendons connect muscles to bones, and ligaments connect bones to other bones. So here's just an example of the various connective tissues found in just our knee joint. There's loose fibrous tissue, there's hyaline cartilage, dense fibrous, adipose, and compact bone, just in that one small area of our bodies. Loose fibrous connective tissue supports epithelium and many internal organs. Adipose tissue stores fat. It has very little extracellular matrix. If you look at it under a microscope, it really just looks like big white bubbles with thin lines in between. Adipocytes are the cells filled with liquid fat. It functions in energy storage, insulation, and cushioning. It's found primarily under the skin and also some organs. Dense fibrous connective tissue contains densely packed collagen fibers. This is what is found in tendons and ligaments. That's what they all look like under a microscope. Supportive connective tissue, cartilage, and bone fall under this category. Their functions include structure, shape, protection, and leverage for movement. Cartilage is more flexible than bone because it lacks the mineralization of the matrix. Cartilage is made of chondrocytes and chondroblasts. Cells lie in chambers called lacuna. Its matrix is solid but flexible. It lacks a direct blood supply, so it heals very, very slowly. This is what our ears are made of. It's very flexible. We don't have any bones in our ears. If you ever look at a skull, there's no ears because our ears and the tip of our nose made of cartilage. Soft and flexible, but still solid. The 3 types of cartilage, they're distinguished by the type of fibers found in the matrix. There's hyaline cartilage, which contains fine collagen fibers found in the tip of the nodes, ends of long bones in the fetal skeleton. Elastic cartilage has lots of elastic fibers found in the outer ear, and fibrocartilage have strong collagen fibers. These are found in the discs between our vertebrae. Our vertebrae has to hold us up every second of every day. Cartilage between those that cushions it needs to be a little bit stronger. Bone is the most rigid connective tissue. Its matrix is made of collagen and calcium salts. Salts surround protein fibers, which provide elasticity and strength, like steel rods in reinforced concrete. There are two types of bone tissue. There's compact and there's spongy, and it's based on how they look and how much space they have in between. Cells called osteoblasts and osteoclasts form the matrix in bone tissue. So our bone is constantly breaking down when we need calcium and then being reformed when we need to absorb that calcium out of our blood. It's that homeostatic process. I will link this YouTube video about how the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts work together to maintain the calcium balance in our blood. So compact bone makes up the shaft of long bones, consists of cylindrical structural units called osteons. Those are under the microscope, they look like the little circles right there in the middle. In the middle of the osteon, there's a central canal that contains blood vessels and nerves. And bone cells, just like cartilage, are located in the lacuna, in the little spaces. Spongy bone is inside the ends of the long bones. It's lighter than compact bone, but it's still strong. See, the compact bone in the picture is very, very dense. There's not a lot of space. And then the spongy bone literally looks like a sponge. There's little holes throughout it. Fluid connective tissue. Blood and lymph are our two fluids that are classified as connective tissues. Blood is made of a fluid matrix called plasma, and all of the other cellular components, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. We'll get into those in more detail when we get to that chapter. Lymph is derived from the fluid surrounding the tissues, the extracellular fluid. It contains mainly white blood cells, and it flows through lymphatic vessels to absorb excess interstitial fluid and then returns lymph to the cardiovascular system. So there's your circulatory system, all your arteries and veins all throughout your body. The lymph also has a system of vessels that it flows through. The little dots throughout, those are called nodes, lymph nodes. Your white blood cells flow through those to detect pathogens, see if you're healthy or not. If you're healthy, everything gets turned back to the bloodstream. And we'll go over the immune system and all that in more detail as well later in the semester. Next section is about muscular tissue. There are three main types of muscular tissue, but in general, they are specialized to repeatedly contract. Its cells are called muscle fibers, and there are the three main types: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Skeletal muscle is what we have attached to our bones by tendons. The contraction of our skeletal muscle moves our skeleton. This is the only type of muscle that is voluntarily controlled. And even then, some of our skeletal muscle is not. It works whether we want it to or not. But most of our skeletal muscles, when we move something, we are voluntarily moving our skeletal muscle to move our bones. Muscle fibers are very long. They can run the entire length of the muscle. If you look at it under a microscope, they have multiple nuclei and they are striated or striped in appearance. Looks like a zebra. Smooth muscle does not have those striations. That's why it is called smooth. They're spindle-shaped cells with one nucleus. They're involuntarily controlled. This muscle works all the time, automatically. We don't even have to think about it. And these are found in the walls of our viscera, our intestines, our bladder, our esophagus. Once you swallow your food, you don't have to consciously think about your muscles moving to move the food down your digestive system. Your smooth muscle does that automatically for you. Cardiac muscle. The word cardiac implies heart. This is the muscle that is only found in our heart. It is striated, so it has those stripes, just like skeletal muscle, but it has an extra thick stripe called an intercalated disc. It also has a single nucleus, and obviously it is involuntary. We don't voluntarily tell our heart to beat. But those intercalated discs are the ways that our heart cells communicate with each other. So our heart beats as one unit. So under the microscope, this is what the cardiac muscle looks like. Ignore that slide. Nervous tissue is our next type of tissue. Consists of neurons and neuroglia. There are three primary functions: sensory input, integration, and motor output. On the right, that is a picture if you've ever been to a bodies exhibit. They had a traveling one. They had one in Las Vegas. Some enterprising scientist cut all the nerves out of a human body and preserved them and laid them out on a table and took pictures of them. It was an exhibit. Neurons have three parts. Dendrites carry information towards the cell body. The cell body contains the nucleus and other organelles. And then it has a long tail called an axon that conducts nerve impulses away from the cell body. Some axons are covered in myelin, which is a fatty substance that makes the message move faster. Neuroglia actually outnumber neurons 9-1. They take up more than half the volume of the brain, and its main function is to support and nourish neurons. There are various glial cells or neuroglia throughout our bodies, throughout our nervous system. Again, something we'll get into when we actually talk about the nervous system. Epithelial tissue. There are a lot, but it should be fairly simple to keep track of because they're named after how many layers there are and what shape the cell is. So epithelium, or plural is epithelia, made of tightly packed cells, lines our body cavities, covers our body surfaces, and is found in glands. It is anchored by a basement membrane on one side and then free on the other. It is named for the number of cell layers and the shape. There's a general picture of an epithelial cell, an epithelial membrane with the basement membrane and then all the cells on top. So simple epithelium is a single layer of cells. Stratified epithelium is multiple layers of cells. And then we also have something called pseudo-stratified epithelium, which is actually a single layer that looks like multiple layers. Because of the location of the nuclei, it appears stratified. However, every cell touches the basement membrane, so there's only one layer. There's pictures of each there at the bottom. And then shape. A flat shape we call squamous. So simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flattened cells. Cuboidal, a cube is a square. So a simple cuboidal layer of epithelium is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. We also have columnar-shaped cells. They look like columns. Single layer of column-shaped cells. Again, examples at the bottom. So we can have simple, squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. We can also have stratified of each of these three. Pseudo-stratified we just talked about. And the last one is something called transitional epithelium. Your bladder is made of transitional epithelium. They change shape because your bladder has to fill. And then when you use the restroom, your bladder shrinks. So those cells have to be able to expand and contract depending on the size of your organ at any given time. So glands, one or more cells that make and secrete a product. There's two types. Exocrine glands secrete into ducts, which are little tubes that run the length of your blood vessels normally. And endocrine glands secrete into the bloodstream. They don't have ducts. They secrete straight into the bloodstream. Systems, cavities, and membranes. So moving up in the world, we went from tissues, talked about some organs. Now we're going to talk about systems. So when we talk about these things, we have to talk about them the right way. Those of you who have taken anatomy or have yet to take anatomy, you know, anatomical terms are very, very important. So in physiology, standard terms are used when referring to anatomical parts of humans. They always refer to a body that is in the upright standing position. This is called the anatomical position. So anterior refers to the front. We can also use the word ventral, but that gets confusing. If you're talking about a human, it also refers to the front. But if you're talking about a four-legged animal, it refers to towards the belly. And a four-legged animal, their belly is actually toward the ground. So anterior is strictly the front. Ventral is toward the belly, which on humans is the same direction. Posterior or dorsal, same toward the back. Superior means up toward the head. Inferior means down toward the feet. Some are relative to other body parts. Something that is medial is closer to the midline of the body, and then lateral is away from the midline. When referring to an appendage like an arm or a leg, proximal means closer to the trunk of the body, and distal means away from the trunk of the body. An organ is a group of tissues performing a common function, and then groups of organs with similar functions is an organ system. Some of these organ systems, like the respiratory system, occupy specific cavities. Others, like the muscular system or the skeletal system, are found throughout the body. Organs and cavities are lined with membranes, many of which secrete fluid. Fluid often talks to the cells inside the organ and protects them. Organ systems work together. Some organs are involved in the function of more than one organ system, like the pancreas plays a role in both the endocrine and the digestive systems. Other structures and glands also contribute to the operation of organ systems. So here is a list. Each of these will be a chapter pretty much from here on out. Integumentary, we're going to talk about today. Cardiovascular has two chapters. Lymphatic and immune are two separate chapters. We have a chapter on digestive, respiration, urinary. Chapter on skeleton, muscles, nervous system. Nervous system also has a chapter about senses. The endocrine system is a huge part because the endocrine system controls a lot of our homeostatic mechanisms, and then of course our reproductive system. Our body cavities, our ventral body cavity. There's two main ones, ventral and dorsal. Their ventral cavity, or coelom, in early development. We are called coelomates because we have a complete coelom or body cavity within us. Contains the thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic cavities. The diaphragm separates the thoracic and the abdominal cavities. And the thoracic cavity contains the lungs and the heart. The abdominal cavity contains the stomach, liver, spleen, pancreas, gallbladder, and most of the small and large intestines. The pelvic cavity contains the rectum, the urinary bladder, the internal reproductive organs, and the rest of the small and large intestines. Males have an external extension of the abdominal wall called the scrotum, which contains the testes. Females obviously do not have this. The dorsal body cavity is very simple. It contains the cranial cavity and the vertebral canal. Membranes. Membranes line cavities and the internal spaces of organs and tubes that open to the outside. There are four types: mucous, serous, synovial, and the meninges. Mucous membranes line the tubes of the digestive, respiratory, urinary, and reproductive systems. It is composed of epithelium overlying loose, fibrous connective tissue. It contains goblet cells that secrete the mucus. Serous membranes line closed cavities that are not open to the external environment. They cover the surface of the organs contained within. Pleurae line the thoracic cavity and cover the lungs. Pericardium forms the pericardial sac and covers the heart. Double layer of peritoneum called mesentery lines the abdominal cavity and covers its organs. You can kind of see how that works in the picture. The fist and the balloon is the kind of the representation that you can think of. If you punch a balloon, it's going to be double membrane with the one side of the balloon on each. Synovial membranes composed only of loose connective tissue. It lines freely movable joints like your elbows and your knees, and it secretes synovial fluid for lubrication. We need our elbows and our knees to be oiled like the Tin Man. We don't want to become the Tin Man and become stiff. We need that synovial fluid to keep our joints freely moving. Meninges, composed only of connective tissue, again, found in the dorsal cavity around the brain and spinal cord. And sometimes, if you hear the term meningitis, that is just an inflammation of the meninges. They are layers. It's that covering. You can peel it off the brain if you ever dissect a brain. Meningitis can be caused by many things: bacterial meningitis, viral meningitis. Just depends on where it comes from. The integumentary system. It doesn't get its own chapter. It's fairly short, so it gets included in this first chapter. Includes the skin and accessory organs such as hair, nails, and glands. It protects underlying tissues from trauma, pathogen invasion, and water loss. It is our first line of defense if something wants to make us sick. Our skin physically keeps pathogens out of us. It helps regulate body temperature. It contains sensory receptors such as touch and temperature receptors, and it makes us aware of our surroundings. It contains all 4 tissue types. The skin has 2 main regions, the epidermis and the dermis. And then under the skin, there's a subcutaneous layer that we sometimes call the hypodermis. The epidermis is the thin outermost layer of the skin. It's made of stratified squamous epithelium, so flat cells, but many layers of them. Stem cells that produce new epidermal cells are in the deepest layer. If an injury destroys the stem cells, the skin needs to be replaced. Our skin needs to be replaced every day anyways. We lose skin cells. Our skin cells only last about 2 weeks. An autograft is when they take skin from another area of the body and put it on. They do this to burn victims a lot. An allograft is when skin comes from a whole different person. Scientists can also now grow skin in a lab. Cells found in the epidermis. Keratinocytes in the upper layers of the epidermis. They are dead, but they are filled with keratin, which forms a waterproof barrier. Langerhans cells is a type of white blood cell. Melanocytes produce melanin. This is what produces our skin color. It also protects us from UV light. People actually have the same number of melanocytes, but the amount of melanin that those melanocytes actually produce varies from person to person. So obviously, the more melanin that your melanocytes produce, the darker skin you have. Other contributors to skin color are keratin and hemoglobin. Epidermal cells produce vitamin D when exposed to UV rays. Vitamin D is important in the homeostatic regulation of calcium and phosphorus levels in the body. The dermis is a thick inner layer of skin. It's made of dense, fibrous connective tissue. Contains collagen and elastic fibers for strength and elasticity. Contains blood vessels, sensory receptors, and glands. Sensory receptors are specialized for touch, pressure, pain, hot, and cold. The subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis, is technically not part of the skin, but it is composed of loose connective tissue and adipose tissue. It stores energy, insulates, and protects. It's where a lot of the adipose cells are found. Nails offer a protective covering of the digits, our fingers and toes. Nails grow from the nail root to the nail bed. The cuticle covers the nail root, and the lunula, the white half moon shape at the base. Hair follicles, epidermal structures that surround the hair itself. The hair shaft is the portion of the hair that protrudes from the skin. The color of the hair comes from melanin. As melanocytes age, they produce less pigment, and that's when our hair turns gray. We also have tiny little muscles, the erector pili muscles, attached to each hair follicle. These can contract, which will create the sensation of goosebumps. And then we have glands in our skin. Oil glands or sebaceous glands produce sebum, which softens the hair and skin. It also inhibits bacterial growth. They do not like the pH of our sebum, or our sebaceous glands. Yeah, our sebum. Acne is the inflammation of the sebaceous glands. We also have sweat glands, which are a little bit different. Sudoriferous glands. In the dermis, their ducts open onto the skin's surface, and this is what helps regulate our body temperatures. We sweat when we get too hot, so when the sweat evaporates, it cools our body down. And then the last section, homeostasis, which we already went over a lot of homeostasis in chapter 1. We're going to review it one more time. So a relatively constant internal environment. There are various conditions in the body that are maintained within a relatively narrow range of normal values. Blood glucose levels, pH, body temperature are just 3 of them. There are many, many more. Each chapter we will talk about a system and the homeostatic mechanisms that regulate that system. But if conditions vary too much, then illness results. If our body temperature gets too hot, we have a fever, something is wrong. The internal environment has 2 parts, blood and interstitial fluid. Blood delivers oxygen and nutrients to the tissues and carries away carbon dioxide and wastes. Interstitial fluid surrounds body cells. Substances are exchanged through it. Body systems work together to keep these substances within the range of normalcy. The nervous and the endocrine systems coordinate the other organ systems. The nervous system is faster, but the effects don't last as long as the endocrine system. The endocrine system secretes hormones, which are chemical messengers that travel in the blood to different areas of the body. Feedback mechanisms. We talked about the negative feedback. It's the primary mechanism used in the body. It has that set point that always has to be maintained. There are 2 components to every negative feedback system, a sensor and a control center. The output of the system turns down or off production. Positive feedback brings about a change in the same direction as the original stimulus for a short time, like childbirth. It can be harmful in some situations, like a fever. A fever is a positive feedback mechanism where our temperature gets higher and higher until that whatever pathogen is invading us gets killed or goes away. But most of the time, childbirth, sneezing is completely normal. That's the event. This is the one that needs an event. And that is all for chapter 4.